My name is Christina Fernandez, and I work in the City Manager's office. I will be the moderator for tonight's town hall. For those of you who may have joined us in the past, you've heard this before, but I wanted to describe how tonight's meeting will go. First, all of the lines are muted, and that's simply because of the technology. And for such a large phone call to occur, it's hard to make this a productive call when all the lines are live. Many people have sent in questions ahead of time. We will get to those specific questions in just a bit. If you have a question tonight, there are 3 ways you can reach out. You can email cityinfo@ssf.net during this call, and we will address it. You can send a text to 650-272-7431. Or if you happen to be joining this call via your computer, there is a chat function. You can submit a question that way, and we will address it as well. If after this call a question comes up, don't hesitate to email us at cityinfo@ssf.net, and we will respond to your email. Also, all of the questions from tonight will be posted on our website at www.ssf.net/coronavirus. Tonight's town hall once again features our mayor, Rich Garbarino, who has a few words to say to you all. Also joining us is our city manager, Mike Futrell, who will give us an update from the last time we held a town hall regarding the coronavirus. Dr. Brian Sloan of Stanford, who can address any COVID-19 related medical issues, and Shirley Gibson, directing attorney from Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County. And now I'll turn it over to our mayor, Rich Garbarino.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, everyone. This is Mayor Rich Garbarino. Thank you for joining us tonight for another virtual city town hall. I want to thank everyone for doing their part in slowing the spread of COVID. I know there's the fatigue of social distancing and wearing your face mask, but recent numbers provided by the county show that we can bring our numbers down if we all work together. I'm hopeful that San Mateo County will be removed from the state's watch list, helping our residents, our schools, and our businesses return to some form of normalcy. Thank you for doing your part. Let's keep up the good work. We are stronger together. Thank you. Christina?
Thank you, Mayor Garbarino. Now I'd like to turn it over to our city manager, Mike Futrell, for some more information.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last Friday, Governor Gavin Newsom released new guidance for reopening businesses, offices, our way of life during the COVID-19 pandemic. The guidance adopts a colored tier system: purple, red, orange, and yellow. Purple is the worst category, and San Mateo County is in the purple category. Currently, 38 counties in California are in the purple category, and that represents 87% of California's population. The purple category term replaces the term county monitoring list previously used. Nevertheless, under the new guidance, even in the purple category, this new guidance allows for more activities to occur. Most notably, indoor barbershops and indoor hair salons are allowed to reopen starting today, as is indoor retail shops, as long as the stores do not exceed 25% of their normal capacity. That means the mall at Tanforan can reopen, but the food court cannot, because inside dining is still not allowed. Counties, such as San Mateo County, can move from the higher to the lower tiers, and as you move to a lower tier, more things are open. For San Mateo County, this means we need fewer new cases and a lower COVID-19 positivity rate. The governor was clear last week, however, that moving from a higher to a lower tier will not be easy or quick. In order to advance to the next tier, a county must meet the metrics for the next tier for 2 straight weeks. And there is a mandatory 21-day waiting period between moving tiers. And a county, if its numbers go the wrong way, can be moved back into a higher category. So as the mayor said, please continue to wear your mask. Please do your part. We need to fully reopen. So again, to recap a little bit, because we're getting a lot of questions about what's open, what's not, what did the governor say last week. Still closed are indoor gyms and fitness centers. Still closed are indoor restaurants, indoor nail salons, places of worship, and cultural ceremonies like weddings and funerals indoors are still closed. The state has put out some pretty interesting guidance, however, and I'm going to give you a website. I'm also going to link this to the city website to make it easier to find. But this state website has what's open and what's closed for every county in California, including San Mateo County. But if you're interested in San Francisco or Santa Clara, you can go there and say, where's the nearest indoor nail salon? Probably Lake County, about 2 hours north of us. But that website is covid19.ca.gov/safer-economy. And that will be linked and prominent on the city website, which is ssf.net. That's much easier, ssf.net. And just click on the big COVID virus on the screen, and it'll take you to all of these resources. Now, reopening is just one of the things we have to worry about. We're also very concerned about the human need side of this, where people have lost their jobs or struggling because their children are learning at home, and how do they get to work with that. We provide assistance, and I want to give you that information in case you need it. And that's particularly necessary today, as today is the last day of the county eviction moratorium. And I know we have a wonderful speaker from Legal Aid right after me that's going to give you details on the state's plan, because we're very concerned about our renters, about people who have mortgages, trying to pay their mortgages, and about our commercial establishments as they have to pay the rent as well. But the city does provide emergency rental assistance for residents. It's called the Renter Assistance Program, and it is available at the local YMCA over on Huntington. That is our designated service provider. We have partnered with the YMCA, who will actually meet with folks, get their information. Their phone number, 650-276-4101. Again, 650-276-4101. Or again, you can find that information on our city website, ssf.net. So far, the City Council has appropriated over $700,000 to help renters during this time of need. So if that's you, go to ssf.net or to get the phone number to the YMCA and connect. Another program that the City Council has started is to help our small landlords, people who may have a few rental units and they still have a mortgage they have to pay, and they may be struggling because their renters can't pay. It's called the Landlord Default Prevention Program, where if a landlord agrees to forgive the rent of the tenants, then the city will help out that landlord by providing a grant to pay the mortgage. So applications for the Landlord Default Prevention Program are being accepted right now through September 14th. And again, if you're a small landlord or you know someone who's struggling as a small landlord, and by that I mean they have a few units. The program is not designed to help these big companies that might have 200 apartments. That's not what we're looking at. But we have a lot of folks in town that own a couple of rental places or maybe a fourplex, and they're struggling because their tenants are struggling. And we have a program to try to help them. But go to ssf.net if you're in that situation, and you can apply. And City Council has put aside $280,000 for that. Helps both the landlord and the renter, because the landlord doesn't get it unless he agrees to waive the back rent for his tenants. So we're doing all we can. But again, if you have struggles more than just paying the rent, again, check in with the YMCA as the core service agency for this area. They provide comprehensive service and programs to assist residents during this pandemic, including paying the rent, but also food assistance, assistance if your car is broken down, utility assistance, and food distribution. So again, their phone number is 650-276-4101. And all that again is on our website, ssf.net. We are particularly attuned to the human need in our city and across the country. As you may know, the federal unemployment benefits expired about 3 weeks ago, and now the rent is coming due, and we're very concerned about our neighbors, and we're doing all we can to assist them. So those are some things that are available to you. We'd like to keep you up to date with things like this town hall. We also put out once a week several city newsletters by email. That's the most comprehensive way you can keep up with what's happening in the city, because things are happening quickly these days. And you send us an email at cityinfo@sssf.net. That's cityinfo, CITYINFO @sssf.net. And we'll get you on this distribution list. And every week you'll get at least 2 updates from the city on what's happening with COVID-19, maybe with the fires, with everything else that's happening in our city. We encourage you to stay connected as well through social media with the city: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're doing all we can to push out information and to you so that you're make sure that you have all this available. And one last plug, I'd also encourage you to sign up for SMC Alert. I know you've smelled the smoke. I have. It's killing me right now. And we're going to have that for a while. I spoke to the fire chief this morning. He said, while it may appear the fires are under control, they're still burning a lot. And given the winds, we're going to be having this smoke for at least a week or more. So SMC Alert will send you a text or an email, your choice, of things that are happening like fires or earthquake or other emergency situation. It's run by the county, and it's got a really long email address. I'm going to say just go to sssf.net, and we'll have a link on how you can sign up for SMC Alert, San Mateo County Alert, because right now you need all the information you can in a timely fashion. So sign up for our electronic newsletters. You'll get 2 a week at least. Sign up for SMC Alert. You'll get text or emails from the county updating you on whatever the next disaster is to impact our county. And know that we're here to help you. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Christina.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Our next speaker is Shirley Gibson, Directing Attorney from Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, who is joining us tonight. She's here to give us information about renter protections, how to use the repayment extensions in the county moratorium, and how tenants can access assistance in navigating this difficult time. Shirley?
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everybody. I'm Shirley. I'm one of the housing attorneys at Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County. I work with a team of folks, legal professionals, who are dedicated to helping low-income tenants in the county for free, with the primary objective that we keep y'all in your home. I do have a few slides, and I don't know if it's possible for IT to put those up on the Zoom. Not seeing them. So I will start with a little bit of a preamble that there's a lot happening legally with eviction defense right now. You probably are seeing a lot in the news about federal action, the state bill that's pending as we speak. I believe it just passed the Senate, and the legislature's sitting on it right now. We'll see if it passes tonight. And that looks like the last slide, so we're gonna go all the way to the beginning. There you go. You got it. And so I'm not going to get into the weeds of what each and every law that's relevant to South San Francisco tenants are, because that's a long presentation and not what you signed up for today. But I really do want to focus on, based on the laws that do apply, what it is that tenants who are in financial distress right now can do now to sort of shore up their rights and maximize the chances of their tenancy being sustained. So in the next slide, this is just to reinforce that there are sort of an abundance of laws that are relevant and at work right now. all of which are supposed to work together and overlay to help you stay in your home. Just at a high level, the state law that everybody's reading about in the news right now is now AB 3088. That's a rebranding of what you might have read about as AB 1436. This is the compromise bill that Governor Newsom was involved in negotiating, and that is pending, as I said, as we speak, but by midnight tonight, we'll know if it becomes law. And sort of at a high level, this is ultimately targeted at making rent debt that tenants could be evicted for not paying into civil debt, meaning it's money that the tenant still owes, but wouldn't be evicted as a consequence of failing to pay. And so it covers a certain period of time that actually is pretty parallel with what our local San Mateo County ordinance covers. And if that does become law, then we're going to have to have a little bit of a learning curve as we see how it relates and overlays with our local law. But that would be a state law that covers the whole state, so the whole county and everyone in South San Francisco equally, and mostly relates to non-payment of rent evictions. We have locally in our county also two things in play. Our local court, the Superior Court, and the presiding judge of our Superior Court has issued an order that court proceedings are not going to move forward for at least the next month. And so that is a hold on the eviction court proceedings that results in tenants getting locked out. That's on hold right now based on a local order. And then our San Mateo County eviction moratorium, which is technically Emergency Rule 2020-01. That's what creates a right for tenants to have more time to pay rent debt that's accruing during this pandemic. And as our city manager referenced, the end of that period where rent debt's going to be covered by the San Mateo County eviction moratorium is ending today, actually, but there's still a forward-looking right to pay over a more extended period of time. And then we have a federal law also that's going to give some tenants more time who are covered by the federal eviction moratorium, and that's giving tenants sort of a longer time frame in which to pay before evictions can move forward, extending what would normally be a 3-day notice to a 30-day notice. So as you can see, there's this whole assembly of things all working together to try to help tenants stay in their home. And so let's talk a little bit about what tenants can actually do to make sure that these laws work for them as intended. So on the next slide, the biggest thing that I want to reinforce here, and if you remember nothing else from what I say today, is that tenants are generally entitled to due process. That means no matter how much rent you owe, no matter where you live, even if it's a room in a house, no matter how angry your landlord is about what's going on, you're entitled to written notice from that landlord and a legal procedure in court before you can be forced to leave. We're seeing a lot of illegal eviction activity happening right now, I think just because people are getting scared and desperate, and many people who don't understand that they have the legal right to due process and a legal procedure think that they have to leave because they owe too much money. And that's something that is just important to know in the community, and make sure your friends and neighbors are aware of, that these laws don't work if you get scared into leaving without availing yourself of your rights. So don't be frightened into moving, always ask questions, and make sure that if your landlord is doing something really illegal, like changing your locks, shutting off your utilities, packing your stuff up and putting it out on the curb, know that that's illegal, and know that you have the backing of legal folks at Legal Aid Society, and you can call the police for intervention on that. On the next slide, the most constructive thing you can do is communicate with your landlord. Notifying your landlord if you're not going to be able to pay your rent is a great opportunity for y'all to work together with the programs that were previously mentioned, trying to cooperatively apply for rental assistance through the tenant assistance program, where landlords oftentimes have to provide some documentation to help with that, Or the tenants can even be supportive of the landlord applying for the default prevention assistance. If the tenant and their neighbors are, lots of them, behind on some rent, the tenants can help provide documentation for the landlord to get assistance. So if there's going to be an income shortfall, don't let that be a surprise to your landlord. Make sure you're communicating it, and also don't commit to particular payment plans without getting that looked over by a legal services lawyer or somebody who can give you competent legal advice. A lot of the laws that I mentioned give you a certain amount of time to pay a certain amount of money, and you wouldn't want to enter into a repayment agreement that conflicted with the law. So just making sure everybody's rights are covered and that you're agreeing to something that's consistent with the law. Don't sign things that you haven't had looked at. On the next slide, communicating with your landlord verbally is fine, especially if you're working together, but to protect your legal rights, you should also communicate in writing. So again, even if you've told the landlord, hey, I lost my job, I'm going to be late on rent, it's going to take a while before I can pay it back, also put that in writing. Under both our local San Mateo County eviction moratorium and the pending state bill, in both instances, you have to document in writing with a written statement that you have COVID-related income shortfall or increased expenses, some type of economic impact on your household related to COVID. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that you got sick. It can be an indirect sort of relationship, like you had to stay home with kids who were out of school, or you had increased expenses, related to having a shelter in place. Anything related to COVID can be an economic impact that justifies delayed rent payments or conversion to civil debt. So putting that in writing is important. Under our local moratorium, you're also supposed to provide documentation of that impact. If putting it in writing is a little bit tricky for you, you have a useful template available at the Legal Aid website. We have a COVID page with some template letters in English and Spanish. So check out our website if you need some help writing that letter. Also, keep a copy of whatever you send. Under a local moratorium, you can send a written document, by mail or however you would normally submit your rent. But if you also communicate with your landlord by text or by email normally, you can also send texts and emails. But keep a copy no matter how you send it. Next slide. So as we've referenced a couple times here, there's a particular period under our local moratorium that ends today. That doesn't mean that there's no more protections under our moratorium. What it means is that the period of time available for delayed rent payments, it really only goes from April through August. Those 5 months are a special period of time where if you accrued rent debt during that time, you now have more time to pay it off. Over the next 12 months, up through August 31st of 2021, you can make payments gradually over time. Up to half of the total rent debt accrued over these past 5 months would need to be paid within 6 months, and then the other half can be paid off in another 6 months. So this is giving people sort of this gradual payment plan to get caught up without being in default, which is just the legal term we would call being so behind in rent that you're subject to eviction. So our moratorium doesn't stop protecting you, but new rent isn't going to come under the cover of that protection after today. Next slide. So what that means is that rent that comes due tomorrow after that protection period is over, that's not rent that you have more time to pay. So prioritizing the current months of rent that come due after today is the first and most important strategy. After notifying your landlord that you're going to be late, start paying what you can as soon as you can for the current month of rent. So if you have some money and you're trying to decide what's most important to pay first, the answer is September. Pay September's rent first, because if you didn't pay September on time, you could get an eviction notice just for being late on September right away. April, May, June, July, and August, you shouldn't be getting an eviction notice for that yet, because you have this delayed payment right to pay that over a long period of time. But that's not true anymore for September. So September's rent is going to be most important. October's rent is going to be pretty important too. Under the state law, there's going to be some cover for rent past September and October. But right now, the most important thing is to prioritize September and October. So if you're applying for rental assistance with any of the core service agencies, they're going to also know to prioritize September's rent. Documenting that that's what you're paying by making it clear with your landlord. You write it on your check on the memo line. You write it on your money order. You put a letter in with your payment. We have a template for that on the same website if you want to have a letter to enclose with your rent payment. That's a good way to make sure that your landlord knows how to apply that payment, because otherwise they might think, oh, I'm going to put this to April, which again is not the most urgent rent to be paying right now. Next slide. So a lot of these laws are confusing in how they work together. A lot of us in the legal advocacy arena are still figuring out a little bit how the new state laws are going to interact with our local laws. Don't try to figure it out on your own. Don't try to figure it out on Google. Ask the questions of the people who know. And you can get free legal help by calling us at Legal Aid. The number here, 517-8911, is our hotline specifically for housing issues. So if you call that number, you're going to get one of our housing team who should be able to answer your question. And if you need a legal consultation about an eviction notice, any legal papers you've received, or anything that your landlord's doing that seems like it's not consistent with these laws, then we're going to get you hooked up with a lawyer for a free consultation. You can also check out the resources on our COVID-19 page. We have an explainer video about the eviction moratorium, and as I said, some letter templates and some FAQs about the eviction moratorium. We'll have some new things up after today, assuming that the state bill becomes law, because a lot of questions are going to come up about whether the rent that you owe is something that you can be evicted for paying, for not paying. So civil debt conversion is going to be sort of the next thing that we're figuring out as a community and how that interacts with our eviction moratorium. So stay posted on that. And with that, I think that's everything I've got to present.
Thank you so much, Shirley. This is all fantastic information that I'm sure our residents really appreciate. Our last speaker tonight is Dr. Brian Sloan of Stanford, who is joining us. He's here to address any COVID-19 related medical issues. Dr. Sloan?
Thank you for having me. First, I think we should start with the numbers. In San Mateo County to date, we've had 8,169 cases with 131 total deaths. Currently, our estimated R not effective, which is a measure of how COVID is spreading, is 0.77, which is actually a good measure and something we should be happy with. Currently, our total amount of positive tests is about 5.7%. The last 7 days, it's been about 4.8% on average. Currently, hospitalized patients, we have 42 patients hospitalized with COVID or COVID suspected. 13 of them are in the ICU, and that is a combination of both the COVID-19 confirmed patients as well as those who are suspected. In the city of South San Francisco, we have 882 confirmed cases so far, and that brings us to an average of 122.2 cases per 10,000 residents. That is not the highest we have in San Mateo County, however, it's certainly also not the lowest. These numbers, while they are certainly concerning, are better than they have been in the past. However, they're certainly not where we want them to be right now. Additionally, in these past talks, we've had some of these talks where we've had much more reassuring numbers and some talks where we've had much more concerning numbers. Currently, we're right about in the middle per my interpretation. Additionally, there has been some new changes in the science. I think every day we learn something new about COVID. And despite learning all of this new information every day, we still don't have definitive answers, and those are still going to be quite a bit ways off as we determine where we go from here and how, as a medical community, we respond to this virus. Additionally, I did want to say it is critically important to continue mask use in public. That is the most important tool we have in limiting the spread of this virus. Additionally, for those of us, myself included, who have had COVID before and recovered, having it in the past does not make you protected from getting it again. And unfortunately, we have now had documented cases of reinfection, not necessarily in San Mateo County, but elsewhere throughout the world, including in the United States. So we need to make sure we are constantly vigilant, constantly wearing our masks and doing everything we can to keep ourselves and others safe.
Thanks, Dr. Sloan. That's great advice. So I think we'll jump into questions now. If you have a question tonight, there are 3 ways you can reach out. You can email cityinfo@ssf.net during this call, and we will address it. You can send a text to 650-272-7431. If you happen to be joining this call via your computer, there's a chat function. You can submit a question that way, and we will address it as well. So I'll go ahead and start with questions that we've received ahead of time. And I think the first question we will go to probably to Dr. Sloan. We have a question here. How many deaths, any kind, in San Mateo County were there May through July of 2019 versus 2020? It seems like the obituary list in the Daily Journal is not any higher than at any other time. Question for Dr.
That's a really excellent question. And I think what you're trying to get is how has COVID impacted us here in San Mateo County? Unfortunately, I don't have specific numbers of how it's impacted us in San Mateo County, but I can tell you about how it's impacted us in California as a whole. The CDC, which is the Centers for Disease Control, does track all deaths, as well as a measure of what's considered to be excess deaths. The CDC expects flu season as well as the winter time to cause an increase in the overall death rate, and overall they're able to predict the amount of deaths that we have in the United States and as well as every state with a reasonably high level of accuracy. For example, we do know that the predictions that we had for overall death rate in the state of California were 100% accurate, with the exception of December of 2017 and the first 2 weeks of January of 2018, which was a year when we had a quite significant flu pandemic. However, this year, starting in 2020, in the state of California, every single week starting in April, we have been over the predicted amount of deaths in the state of California. Some weeks it might be as low as 5% over, and some weeks it might be as high as 30% over. So while I can't get those specific San Mateo numbers on short notice, I can tell you that overall the state of California has significantly been impacted, as well as the entirety of the United States. And we do see that the deaths that we're experiencing as a whole are much higher than what we would expect based on past years.
Great, thank you. I have another one for you, Dr. Sloan. Would you recommend one of our residents fly cross-country at this time in order to attend his grandmother's 100th birthday party?
That's a very difficult question. The risk of traveling cross-country in an airplane still remains to be seen. Some airplanes are doing a good job with maintaining social distancing and airflow. Others are not maintaining social distancing as well. That being said, we have had documented cases of at least suspected transmission from air travel. Uses of mask and appropriate hand hygiene may decrease those risks. However, the risks do remain. Air travel is certainly something that definitely needs a really thoughtful risk calculation by the individual. The second part of that question, in order to, go to the birthday party for a 100-year-old relative, I would strongly advise against interacting with anyone who lives outside of your house as much as possible. If you have urgent needs to interact with someone who doesn't live with you, and you make an appropriate risk calculation based on that, that is up to you. But an unnecessary or purely, family-based visit for particularly at-risk senior citizen certainly would be well past my personal risk threshold. Any groups of gatherings of family members tend to be the main drivers of spread in our communities. So please use caution if you do decide to travel. Make sure you use appropriate hand hygiene, social distancing, and mask wearing, and take extra caution as well as a real hard look at whether or not you should be traveling to meet up with any large family gatherings or any other large gatherings especially if it's large gatherings with susceptible and at-risk populations.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for our city manager. Mike, if the moratorium on residential evictions does not expire on August 31st, what consideration will be given to putting property taxes on hold? Too many months have passed without consideration for landlords while property taxes, insurance costs, and repair costs continue to go up. Landlords are hurting too. Mortgages still need to be paid.
Sure, and that's a great question. Property taxes are the domain of the state. And I checked, I saw this question come in earlier today and checked with our friends in Sacramento. There was no movement in Sacramento for any kind of relief on property taxes. So rightly or wrongly, there it is. The city, we don't control property taxes at all. So unfortunately not. We do have the landlord assistance program that I mentioned earlier. And there may be some other assistance programs that will help homeowners and others pay their property taxes, but there's no reduction or abatement of property taxes at this time.
Thank you. And we also have another one regarding rent. So Shirley, if you're available, I'd love to give this question to you. Someone was wondering if the rents could somehow be lowered so people could afford to stay in their rentals. It says some of us are paying over $3,000 a month and it is difficult to survive. What advice would you have for a resident?
Sure. I think this is another opportunity for communication between the landlord and the tenant. There is oftentimes, some room for negotiation. Again, if the landlord's finances allow for it, there's, the rental market is such that I think many landlords would value keeping a sustained tenancy as opposed to having, a vacancy that they may or may not be able to fill, and maybe they can take some reduction on the rent. There's no legal requirement at this point that the landlord, agree to a reduction of rent, but it might be in everybody's best interest. There is a landlord-tenant conciliation program through Project Sentinel, which a tenant could reach out to and see if they can help facilitate that conversation with the landlord. Project Sentinel does a lot of the facilitating of the back and forth with the landlord if there's a proposal that the tenant wants to make. So that could be a productive conversation to try.
Great, thank you. I have another one for Dr. Sloan. Let's see. How does the unhealthy air affect seniors who are trying to keep healthy by doing exercise outside?
That's a very difficult question, and the answer is unfortunately that the unhealthy air qualities are certainly going to have negative impacts, especially on those sensitive groups. Additionally, we do think that certain activities such as smoking or spending too much time in unhealthy air might make you more susceptible to becoming infected with COVID-19 if you are exposed to it. It's a very difficult balance between trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle versus staying inside to avoid unhealthy air. I think right now we've all been really affected not only by the virus, but by the significant wildfires. And it's a very difficult balancing act to try to stay healthy. At this point, I would recommend at least a temporary hiatus on outdoor activities when the air quality is unhealthy, especially for those who are in sensitive groups.
Thank you. I have another question for you. Will we get contact tracing apps available to San Mateo County residents? Might that be something in the future we can get?
That's a good question that I don't yet have a specific answer to. I definitely will reach out and see what answers I can get and try to get them back to you if I hear anything specific.
Great. I have another one for our city manager. Is there anything the city can do to cap rent increases that happen? I'm sorry, I'm having a difficult time reading this. Is there a way that the city can cap rent increases? And does the city, what policies does our city have for mandating rent control both pre and during COVID-19?
Sure, thank you. We as a city do not have any rent control per se, but I believe there was some legislation enacted last year at the state level that set some boundaries on what those rental increases could be. So I'm going to bounce this question over to our friend from Legal Aid that can talk about those boundaries, upper limit boundaries that were set by the legislature last year with the intent of trying to slow down the pace of rent increases.
Yeah, sure. Happy to speak to that. So the Tenant Protection Act is a statewide law that went into effect January. And it does put statewide rent caps that apply to most, but not all tenancies. There's quite a list of exceptions, so you wouldn't necessarily assume this applied to every tenancy, but most tenancies, the current rent cap is on increases of 6.2%, I think, or 6.5%. I don't have this in my memory. It's a little over 6%. There is also a cap, even if you're not covered by the Tenant Protection Act, during a state of emergency, which we are in, as long as it's been declared by the governor, this is in effect. Landlords cannot increase rents by more than 10% because it's an essential good that shouldn't be subject to what they call price gouging. So taking more than a 10% rent increase right now would be a violation of anti-price gouging laws. There isn't a rent freeze, which surprises a lot of people. Rent increases are not presumptively illegal, even though we're in this crisis. We have seen a lot of landlords sort of defer or delay on taking rent increases because, quite frankly, they're lucky to be getting the rent that they currently charge. So increasing it takes a certain amount of temerity. But if there are rent increases, they're not necessarily illegal.
All right, thank you. There is also a question in the chat regarding the landlord default prevention program. A resident writes, instead of setting aside $280,000 for this program, why doesn't the city just add this money to the rental assistance program? If the rent is paid, the landlord is paid. The city manager, did you want to take that one?
Sure. The city early on put money, very early, put money towards renter assistance directly to residents. And since that has twice again put additional money into the money directly to residents. Yet throughout that time, I know they were hearing from small landlords who had tenants that were struggling, and those landlords have mortgages as well. So we could ignore that, or the council could have ignored that and continued to give all the money directly to tenants, but instead said this is a way to help both. We help both the landlord and the tenants living in that building. So if a landlord comes forward and say, my tenants can't pay the rent because of COVID-19, we give the money directly to the landlord in exchange for the landlord forgiving the rent for the tenant. Then the landlord can pay and not default on the building, perhaps have it foreclosed. There is no protection, as we've discussed earlier, no protection for small landlords, small commercial owners. A bank could foreclose on their building. So far greater amount of money has been put directly towards tenants and helping them. And now some money has been given to try to help that struggling landlord in exchange for waiver of the rent. So I think they're just trying to meet the needs that were coming forward. And this one, I agree, does seem to meet both ends.
Okay, and I think to follow up on that, there was an additional question regarding what is preventing the landlords from pocketing that money and moving to evict anyway?
Well, certainly you have heard earlier the layer upon layer upon layer of protection against evictions. And for those listening, it is a bit confusing because it is changing so rapidly. So I absolutely encourage anyone with a question to call legal aid. That phone number they showed earlier was the most important part of this presentation, I think. The part of the landlord assistance program would be also for them to show that they are behind in paying their mortgages. And like, for example, when we give money to a tenant, we make sure that that actually does go to the landlord. And in this sense, when we give money to a landlord, we'll make sure it actually does go towards the mortgage. It's a pretty tightly controlled program run out of our Economic and Community Development Department, because in past years, others have told us stories where they gave money for rent and people did things other than pay for rent. So we make sure that that money goes where it's supposed to.
Great, thank you. I have a question here for Dr. Sloan. Some experts are saying that some smoke gets into living spaces even if doors and windows are closed. Is it then okay to exercise inside?
Please press *6 to unmute.
I would recommend exercising inside if you have the space and ability to. There's certainly going to be some smoke that might get into your home or apartment. That is going to be functionally unavoidable. If you have severe respiratory issues and any amount of smoke would be aggravating to you, I would not recommend exercising, but for the vast majority of people who are not encountering significant respiratory issues at baseline, I think that the small amount of smoke that you might be exposed to in your home would not be enough to recommend not exercising inside.
Okay, thank you. We have another one for our city manager. How do we find out which restaurants in our city and county are open for outdoor dining?
What an excellent question. That will be on our website as well. But I can tell you we have 6 or 7 already. Actually, I just see that our Director of Economic Development has turned his camera on. Alex, can you recite by memory the dozen or so in town that are outdoor dining? I know not in the downtown, Chevy's on Hickey, because I've eaten there, Amora Restaurant on Linden, Ben Trey on Grand Avenue. But Alex, I know you and your team have worked with at least a dozen others. What other restaurants are open and or will be in the next day or so?
Yes, we're really excited. Not only Amora and Ben Trey, but in addition, we have Grand Palace, Cafe 382, also their adjoining restaurant and bar, Brews at 382, and Thai Satay that are opening up this week. And then we have several other restaurants that'll be opening up in the next week, including Izanami. DeNapoli has outdoor seating as well, and several others up and down Grand Avenue.
And I encourage everyone to please, I see someone's pointed out, yes, Gunter's has outdoor dining as well. Please patronize our restaurants. There are local folks, we have local restaurants, and they are suffering. So either takeout or delivery, or maybe like me, you'd like to get out, although the smoke is a little tough right now. It is time to get out of the house, and outdoor dining is a great way to do it. Thanks for that question.
Great. Speaking of smoke, I have another question for Dr. Sloan. Can running hot water and steaming up your apartment help to clear smoke in the apartment?
That doesn't sound like a method that I've ever heard of that would be good for cleaning smoke. The problem would be the particulates would be so small that even running hot water and creating a lot of steam wouldn't really precipitate out enough of them. While it might make you feel better if the smoke is aggravating you, and the condensation might help you feel a little bit less constricted and have a little bit less congestion, it wouldn't necessarily bring down the particulate level in your home or apartment.
Great, thank you. I have another question for our city manager. Will the mayor and the city council look into any policies that go further than last year's AB 1482, such as a city rental listing, rent stabilization, expanded just cause, etc.?
Sure, and before I go there, someone has put in the chat that Los Tranchas is also open as an outdoor restaurant. I can bring that to the council and see if they have an interest, particularly on some of the just cause eviction measures. You know, the word rent control for many is scary, but when you peel back the onion and you look at what's actually being done, there's some things on just cause eviction, especially that may make sense. But I will bring that and see if the policymakers have an interest.
Great, thank you. That appears to be the end of our questions. If you have additional follow-up questions to your original question, we will definitely be responding to you in more detail via email. So all of our Q&A will be posted on our website at www.ssf.net/coronavirus. Please sign up for all city email updates. And before we end this meeting, I'll turn it back over to our Mayor, Rich Garbarino, for some brief closing thoughts.
Well, thank you. And thank you to our speakers, City Manager Mike Cottrell, Ms. Shirley Gibson, and Dr. Ryan Sloan for sharing their expertise. And I thank all of you for joining us tonight. I know the uncertainty of this pandemic has many of us feeling anxious or worried. And it is my hope that this town hall has helped assuage some of those feelings by giving you an opportunity to ask the questions and learn more about the initiatives our city staff have implemented to help our residents and small businesses. Your voices are more important than ever before, and we need them to be heard. You can do this by doing two things. First, register to vote. Excuse me. You can do this by registering at www.smcare, that's all one word, smcare.org. Your voice is important, so please register to vote. Secondly, stand up and be counted by filling out the census. The census closes on September 30th. You can fill out the census at 2020census.gov, or if your loved one needs some help filling out the census, please contact our census coordinator, Kathy Blandon, at 650-677-6499. We will get through this even stronger than before. Please continue to stay connected and engaged through our city's website at www.ssf.net. And feel free to call us anytime with any concerns you might have. Thank you all again, and have a good evening, and stay well. Good night.